Hello everybody, my name is Zen and welcome to my beta thoughts for Diablo 4. Basically, how I've felt that the beta, both the closed beta and the open beta went, how the game feels, and just in general how I think the game is gonna fare when it comes to launch. There's a lot of thoughts on the mechanics and whatnot, but what I'm gonna not touch on is anything regarding balance, because it makes no sense to do so. I think feel of characters is definitely really important, like how a class in particular feels or does not feel good. That kind of stuff is totally stuff we're going to talk about. But when it comes to like whether or not I think a class is good, that's like completely moot because it doesn't make any sense. That stuff is going to be changed before the game even launches and then afterwards as well. So none of that is relevant here. But let's jump in, talk about my general thoughts, and then we'll dive into specific things that I think are good. And I want to start by saying that my wife, who was playing with me, she had a really good question that she posed to me. We were on the road and driving, and she goes, well, what do you not like about Diablo 4? I was like, ooh, that's a good question. She didn't even ask me what I liked about it, right? She didn't need to. She kind of already had an idea of that. We've been playing together for quite some time at that point. But she asked, what do I not like about the game? I think that was a good question, because it actually made me think, wait a second, what do I not like about the game? And the one thing that actually popped into my head, which was my feedback. And by the way, all of the feedback that I do have will be being put in the proper places for it to be seen. So don't worry about that. This video necessarily isn't about feedback because, well, I think rambly videos for feedback aren't really useful for developers, and it's fun to watch and it's nice to get a player's thoughts on things. But I think there's better ways to go about going and providing feedback. But the thing that I was like, well, what do I not like? I think it was the fact that I was seeing too many players. And that was like one of the things I hadn't even thought about until my wife brought it up. But I am totally okay with seeing players in the open world as I'm, running around, as long as it's really, really rare. And the reason why is because I think the game has a tone that it's trying to set. It's this dark, gritty fantasy world that is very reminiscent of Diablo 2, but like leans way more into the darkness. And when you're running around and you're fighting a bunch of demons, you're in the open world and you're like going from point A to point B, and then you see like Balls McBlaster run by you with the title potential trash. It's funny to see a name like that. It's funny to see a title like that someone has put together. But man, does it just completely rip you out of the experience of being in this dark, gritty world, especially when I think Diablo 4 does a great job of setting it up as a good RPG. It's not just an action RPG. It's not just a top-down isometric RPG, like you get with Diablo 3, Path of Exile. There's 100 other ARPGs I can go through. Torchlight is actually a really good example of this as well, of games that are really just kind of top-down isometric action RPGs at their core. They never really nail, though, the RPG part of that. And I think games that have tried and done pretty good are things like Van Helsing, the Van Helsing series of games, where they try to have more of an RPG feel to them, but it just doesn't quite come together because of other things that bring those games down. However, with Diablo 4, I think that they did a great job of making it feel more like an RPG, and you can get lost in this world and play it as a single-player RPG if you so choose. But I don't like that I can then see random people running around in the world, which makes it not feel as scary as it should, which it takes away from the vibe that the world is trying to set for me and the story is trying to set for me. I will be playing this game with people at launch. I'll be playing it with my wife. I'll be playing it with my friends. There's no reason that I won't. I'm going to have a great time with that. But I do wish that there was also an option for me just to not see other players, just to, after I'm done, you know, leveling my main character with my friends and whatnot, to just have another alternate character that I level up by myself, just with the lights off, and just really get absorbed into the story that the game is trying to tell. So when my wife asked me, like, what do you not like about the game, it took me like 10 minutes to think about it, and then that was the answer that I gave her. And out of everything that I could potentially think of, that was what came to my head, and nothing else stood out outside of that. I had no other criticisms about the game. I was like, actually, that might be the only thing I don't like about Diablo 4. And honestly, if that's the only thing I don't like about the game, then it's in a pretty good spot. You know, the gameplay is solid. The classes feel fun. -1. We'll get to that when we talk about the classes a little later in this video. But like I like the graphics of the game. My wife doesn't like it so much. She likes the more stylized look that Diablo 3 brought. I like the more grounded, gritty look that Diablo 2 and Diablo 4 have. There's a bunch of interesting choices that they made as far as the world is concerned, how it's this big open world and they have these dungeons that you can go and run. The end game is gonna be really interesting to see how it pans out, and I guarantee you people are going to be unhappy with it, and it will change over the course of a handful of patches, and then it will be incredible. And just like Diablo 3, it'll be a game that people come back to time and time again to play through whatever seasons are popping up, because we are going to have seasons in Diablo 4. So in general, my thoughts are, I really love this game. I'm wary to say how good or how successful it's going to be at launch. Normally I'd be like, yeah, I think everybody's going to play it. It's going to be this huge success. But, you know, there's a lot of other stories going on at the same time in the games industry that can change the narrative of how well Diablo 4 does. You know, whether it be the things happening within the games industry, such as the sexual harassment or the unequal work conditions for male versus female, or even transgender people in the games industry, and just how that narrative plays a huge part into what people think of when they think of Blizzard now, and the, you know, people's perceptions of that company and of the developers have changed. Though the people who are working on the game would love you to play their game and, you know, be able to enjoy all the blood, sweat, and tears that they've put into this game. There's a million things that could change how people perceive Diablo 4 in a blink of an eye. And that's why I'm like, I'm not gonna commentate on whether or not I think the game will be successful, because there's a million factors that will factor into that are seen and unforeseen. So really, my thing is, do I think people will enjoy it? I think that's a better question. And I would say most people will enjoy it. Most people will get into it and be like, yes, this is a great action RPG. It's a great RPG. I think there's going to be a huge amount of people who don't necessarily like what's going on in the story. You have a lot of people who came in with Diablo 3 as their first Diablo game, and this game is just exponentially darker, and it's going to, I think, cause a knee-jerk reaction of like, whoa, like I wasn't expecting this kind of adult game. But even though, you know, Diablo is, in a sense, an adult franchise. But like for me personally, I've mentioned this in one of my recent Diablo 4 videos. We allow our 11-year-old son to play Diablo 3. No problem with that. He's been playing it for a few years now. But when it comes down to Diablo 4, he's not going to be allowed to touch it, just because there's a lot of subject matter in there, and the way that the story is told and how dark it is. It's just not. We don't feel like it's appropriate for him. That might change depending on your particular kid. If you have children, you know, you're planning on playing the games with them and how they handle kind of tough or dark subject matters. But for us, we're just like, no way. And I think people who have never played Diablo 2, it didn't even touch Diablo 2 Resurrected, might be a little surprised by how dark this can get. And that's, and like I said, I think that there's going to be a group of people that don't end up liking where the story goes for it. But when it comes to the gameplay, that is a whole other kind of thing. You know, the more casual players are going to grab onto what they think of the story and what they think of what's going on in the Diablo franchise with how they're kind of tying the different games together. But the more mid-tier players, people who've played a lot of Diablo, are going to focus more on the gameplay. And you're going to have people who don't like how the combat feels a little more grounded. It's a little slower than Diablo 3 and more like Diablo 2 in a lot of ways, but also not like it at all. And there's some really good deviations and modernization that happened in the combat that I think are really, really important for the amount of people that will end up liking how the combat actually pans out. And this really is a testament to the skill system, I would say. So let's kind of dive in and talk about how the skill trees work. Because in a way, it's like a hybrid of a lot of other ARPGs that have come before, including Diablo 3 and Diablo 2. It's got a lot of Diablo 2-esque things about it. You know, you've got these skills that you could put points into, and those points will empower the ability if you just like, you know, pump 5. Most of the skills are like 5 max that you can put points into, and it'll just make it stronger and stronger as you put more points into it. And then there's like alternating things that change the way that the ability actually functions that you could put skill points into. So you're getting, like I said, a weird hybrid between Diablo 2 and some other games. They've taken some ideas from Diablo 3. You know, with Diablo 3 you have a skill, and then you have the different runes, and it changes the way that skill behaves with the runes. Well, with the skill tree, you know, you've got a branching system where you put in 1 point into one or another different things that change the way a skill works. And I think overall, the culmination of all the work that they've put into the skill trees is really good at creating interesting builds. And it allows the players to look at the skills that they have available to them and come up with synergies that, you know, maybe other players don't necessarily think are cool, but because that player found a specific synergy that they like or that they find cool, you know, they'll end up using it over some other ones. But in general, I think most players are going to look at what generally does a lot of damage or a lot of AoE damage and kind of navigate their skill tree towards those things. And there's going to be a lot of people coming up with very similar builds. But when it comes to synergies with legendaries and other items that are going to be adding, this is the cool thing, that add skill ranks, so it makes certain skills even more powerful. You know, that's going to add a huge tail to the end game of trying to find the perfect items that give you plus to certain skills that you're using and making those skills more powerful, but also be rolled correctly with other stats as well. Like, there's a lot going on with the itemization and how it pertains to the skills that I think people are going to latch onto and really, really love, just because of the way that it interacts with how you create a build. And this leads me into talking about classes, because, you know, skills and classes go hand in hand. I think for the most part, the majority of classes are gonna be pretty highly played. I think the druid is gonna end up being highly played but not stuck with, and that's a problem, because I think out of all of the classes, it's the one that feels the least impactful. There's some people who are going to latch onto it, and that's the thing that they're going to love. Maybe they played the druid in Diablo 2, and that is their class that they're going to go to. But you know, the way that the class behaves at early levels at its current stage, not even talking about the damage it's doing, I'm just talking about like the abilities that it has and how they interact with each other, just feels like it's lacking a certain flow to it, or it's lacking an obvious, or not even necessarily an obvious choice, but a choice that you can start creating combos with that feel fun to use. You know, for example, I think the rogue is a really good way to look at this. The rogue has this twisting blades ability where it puts 2 blades into an enemy, and then a few seconds later it dislodges and comes back to you. And you could cast this multiple times. It's not like you're losing your weapons during this. You could keep attacking while they're lodged into somebody. But once you realize that you can combine that skill with some of your movement skills like shadow step, or being able to like get super far away, or reposition your character so you can put the daggers in and move in a certain way where they hit a bunch of targets and just wipe everything out. It's learning those combinations just by reading the skills and almost theory crafting on the fly. That is really, really satisfying. And I personally had a very little aha moments with the druid, where I'm looking at the abilities and they were either blindingly obvious that they're meant to be used together, such as like the bear abilities with a fortify skill that increases your HP, and then you do additional damage based on how much extra HP that you have. Like that, it just kind of felt a little too obvious. There was no self-discovery there. It felt like I was being guided down a certain path. Whereas with the rogue, it feels like there was a lot more self-discovery. And heck, even with the barbarian and the wizard and the necromancer, like those are classes that I felt like had a lot of aha moments, a lot of self-discovery, and not a lot of hand-holding. Even though, and I'm going to contradict myself, even though I think that the necromancer has the most amount of hand-holding that any of the other classes have, it still has that self-discovery of you learning how certain things work on the class and being able to kind of pull it together into a build that you want to use. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I think that the druid has far too obvious options available to how you should be building the class, and none of them seem really that exciting when you use the abilities. The animations don't pop the same way as like the rogue or the wizard or even the barbarian with like upheaval and stuff like that. So it just didn't feel right to me, and that stuff will probably be changed before launch. But out of all of the classes, that was the one that I felt the weakest on. Whereas with this open beta that happened this weekend, I felt like the necromancer was a class that kind of stole the show from me. I this entire time I was like, I'm probably going to play a rogue at launch, and I played the necromancer and went, man, I don't know anymore. I might play necromancer because it's really fun, and the way that they've managed to integrate the pet mechanics along with how corpses, so that basically the idea of using corpses, kind of how they work in Diablo 3, but just amplifying that with the skill system in Diablo 4, and it's just all comes together to make a really, really good experience for playing what you would expect to be kind of a pet class, and doing it in a way that makes sense for that class. Like, you start with the ability to summon skeletons. No other class do you start with a skill. You just bash things until you hit level 1, and then you're like, aha, now I can cast something, because then you are able to put an ability point in. Though I will say that once you play enough of the game, you find enough of the Lilith statues, you're gonna be unlocking things like extra stats for your characters, and when you're playing on your main character, you're going to be unlocking extra ability points, so then you can use those on new characters as well. So when you start a new character, you can just put points in. All of that out of the way, if you just look at like a fresh level 1 character with no extra ability points, the necromancer is the only one that just gets a skill right off the bat to use, and it shows you like, hey, you're going to be using pets a lot with this. And even the skill tree doesn't have a lot of skill options compared to the other classes. It has a lot of passive skill options, but they're trying to be like, don't fill your bar with a bunch of other random skills necessarily. Like, you're supposed to be using some kinds of summons here, and I like that. I like how that is meant to work for that class. I also like that you go and find like legendary powers for for items, and you go and do these dungeons and you unlock them for a class. Like you go and do a dungeon, now you unlock a legendary power for your druid that maybe you're not even playing a druid, you're playing a necromancer. So then when you go and make a druid, now you have this stuff unlocked that you're able to use. And that amount of collection that you can do for classes that aren't necessarily the one you're playing fills in some of the gaps that you are missing from like Diablo 3. So in Diablo 3, every now and again, you'll be playing like, I don't know, you'll be playing a necromancer and a bow will drop. And you'll be like, what the hell? And you look at it, it's like, oh, it's actually a really good bow. And then you decide, oh, maybe I'll make a demon hunter. And then you go and you make a demon hunter. This is like a new player experience. And then now you have this cool item that you can use on your demon hunter. They made it so that happens so you do feel like you should go try the other classes. In Diablo 4, the way that they do that is with these dungeons. Yeah, you can still get extra items for these other classes. You could get a wizard wand, for example, for a wizard, or you could get like a big two-handed weapon for your barbarian. But the vast majority of the desire to play another class is coming from you unlocking the stuff by doing the dungeons. And I think that's a really smart way of handling that as well. But none of that would work. None of that would make any sense at all if the combat wasn't tight and had a good flow to it. And the addition of essentially a dodge roll with, hitting your spacebar and being able to dodge, that plus just the weight and the slowness of a lot of the abilities means that the combat feels hefty. It feels weighty and like you're just doing a bunch of stuff. I keep coming back to it because even back when I played the game at BlizzCon 2019, the Barbarian had Upheaval and it just felt so good to use. It was such a satisfying ability. And that was what showed me what they were trying to go for with the combat. That ability seems to have changed a little bit since BlizzCon. You look at the BlizzCon 2019 footage and you notice a lot of stuff that is a bit different. But yeah, I really enjoy just how the combat feels. And what you don't really get to experience much of in the beta is having a mount. And it sounds like a weird thing to have in Diablo because we've never had a mount in Diablo before. But I'm telling you, being able to be on your mount and then have a dismount ability that you use and you like blast through a bunch of demons because you're trying to get to an event and you're like clearing an event and you use your ability to do a bunch of damage to them and now you're off your mount and then you're able to use your normal abilities and then once that's all cleared you pop back on your mount, you move on. It just feels really good in the open world, and clearing out dungeons also feels nice. They took some of the Diablo Immortal ideas for how bosses work, where they have certain breakpoints at which, when you get their health pool down, you're able to collect potions that, refill basically your potions. And it's just everything, how the combat works with the systems, the items, the class skills, just everything. It just is great. And if there's one shining thing from Diablo 4 that is going to make sure that you enjoy the game, it's going to be the combat. And that's not even arguably, it just is just the most important part because it is an action RPG at its core. And if there is not good action in an ARPG, then it's not going to be fun. So they nailed that. And everything else, I feel like, falls into place. Is it perfect? No. Do I still have my reservations of whether or not it's going to be good post-launch at max level? Yes, definitely. But that is mostly because there's a lot of unanswered questions as to what the game is going to be like at max level and whether or not that long tail finding the loop and doing dungeons and whatnot will feel compelling enough. What I don't want Diablo 4 to feel like is an MMO where I log on and I do my daily quests and then I'm done for the day. I don't want that. I want that Diablo 3 loop that I get, or even the Diablo 2 loop of logging in, doing a ladder, or logging in, doing a season, and being able to push and try to get your character as powerful as you possibly can, and having some kind of effect that changes the way that the game is being played, essentially. And that kind of stuff is going to make that end game compelling for me. That kind of stuff is going to make me go, yes, I stick with this game long term, rather than just getting a character all the way through the campaign and then calling it quits or waiting and stuff like that. Granted, I play a lot of Diablo, and that's unlikely to happen, but for the most part, I'm trying to consider my perspective from your average gamer, your average person who's going to pick up this game and play it, whether it be on their Xbox, their PlayStation, or their PC, and figure out, whether or not they're going to like it, outside of just being a normal Diablo nerd. So if I were to summarize my thoughts from the beta, it's that I think the game is really good. I think that Blizzard has kind of found a rhythm with this particular game that may work really well long term, especially with frequent updates and seasons and whatnot. The things that have me worried are whether or not the end game is going to be compelling, though that's a fixable issue. And I normally would be worried about the monetization because they're going to do a season pass for seasons. However, the rewards that you get from the season pass are going to be purely cosmetic, so buying into it is not going to give your character any more power. That's the promise they've made. We'll see if they stick to it, right? There's a whole other political side of the games industry that the game designers don't necessarily have much of a say in. People got to make money, and these companies, they exist to make money so they can continue making more stuff, right? So we'll see if that stays the way it is, or if there's other aggressive monetization. It wouldn't be the first time it's happened. Diablo Immortal is the prime example of that, though that is definitely a different story as far as game design is concerned. So my summary is, I think the game is really good. I think I'm really going to enjoy it. As a person who really loves Diablo, I think they're hitting a lot of the right notes, and I think they're going to bring a lot of new players in, or returning players are going to really love what they're going to see here. It's just that the question of the end game and what the max level is going to look like, and is it going to be too much like an MMO for my taste and stuff like that. Those questions need to be answered, and they can only be answered once the game is launched, and that is unfortunate. So unless you're willing to wait until like a month after the game launches, maybe a little sooner than that, then you're just gonna have to be like me and basically put the money on the line, do the pre-order, and be like, I'm either gonna enjoy it or I'm not. But hey, you know what? At least the story is gonna be compelling enough for me to play through that. The other stuff, big question mark. But at one point you just got to have enough faith that the game is going to be good once it hits the end game. However, because the open beta did happen this last weekend, I'm really, really curious to see what everybody's thoughts were. Let me know in the comments what you think of the game. Do you like it? Do you not like it? And this is the best question ever because my wife did it. What do you not like about Diablo 4? Let me know that before letting me know what you like about it, because I think that is a more compelling question than what do you like about it, especially in a game that seemingly most people seem to enjoy. And I think constant praise can do a bad thing of giving people who've not played the game an impression of how good it's going to be, and then they get their hopes and dreams like way up past the actual expectations of what the game can be, and then you get disappointed players, and that's no good. With all that being said, though, thank you for watching. I'll have more Diablo content on the channel, especially as we get closer to launch and post-launch, but we shall see you guys next time.